What is up, everybody? Good morning. You guys having fun? Yes, at the movies, so much fun, but more than just fun, it is fun with a what? Come on, everybody say it. Fun with a purpose. Come on, throughout this series, we're learning some powerful things about God and about what He wants to do in our lives, and we're having some fun along the way. In fact, this is the way Jesus would often teach us. He would use stories, He would use parables, He would use things that would relate to people in their everyday life to teach them these deep truths. And so we're just having a little bit of fun and using some of our favorite movies as kind of modern day parables to learn some deep things that God is doing in our lives, and we're having some fun along the way. And this is a great opportunity to what? To invite a friend to church. Of course, every Sunday is Good Sunday to invite somebody to church, but at the movies just makes it so much easier because we got popcorn, we got movie characters, we got fun movies with deep truths, and this is the whole reason, really, the whole purpose for this series is to evangelize, to reach people for Jesus, to create moments so that those lives can be changed. And guess what? That is happening because we're celebrating today that just so far in just the 2 weeks of At the Movies, we have already had 21 people make decisions to follow Jesus. Come on, that's awesome, right? That's what it's all about. That's why we do this. And it's because you invited them, that they were here, they had a moment with God, and they were able to make a decision to follow Jesus. And we're going to be really celebrating that next week. Everybody say it, next week. Next week with baptisms, we're going to be baptizing people who have decided to follow Jesus. So if that is you and you made that decision over this last couple of weeks, or even in the last few months, or maybe you've made that decision and have never been baptized, I want to encourage you, get your phone out right now. In the back of the seat there is the little tap things. Just tap your phone on that, get registered, get signed up for baptism so that we can celebrate that with you next Sunday as we wrap up the At the Movies series. But today, come on, we are obviously talking about Here Comes the Boom. Here Comes the Boom. How many have ever seen this movie before? Raise your hand if you've ever seen it before. How many had never seen it before? Anybody never seen? Oh, a whole bunch of people. How many went and watched it when you saw that we were going to? Yeah, a couple of you. How many are going to go watch it after? Yes, I see that. I see those hands. I see those hands. It's a great movie. It's a more lesser known movie than some of the ones that we have done in this series. And yet it's really silly, but it's a lot of fun. And Kevin James, I mean, how can you go wrong with Kevin James, right? He's so much fun and so funny. And he plays this guy in this movie. His name is Scott Voss. And Scott, at the beginning of the movie, he's a kind of burned out school teacher. He's just kind of going through the motions, really kind of lost his passion and his zeal for what he is doing. But one day there's a moment that changes everything because he finds out that the music program is going to be shut down in the school. And when he finds this out, like something stirs in him and he thinks about the effect that this is going to have on the students. He thinks about how this is going to affect his friend, the music teacher. And so in a moment of calling, he steps up and he says, man, somebody's got to do something about this. Maybe it ought to be me. Watch this. Maybe some of you can relate to Scott just a little bit. Because maybe some of you came into this room today, maybe you're just kind of bored with life. Maybe you're just kind of going through the motions in your job and your family and your relationships. But here's what I am praying is going to happen this morning. I'm praying that you're going to have a Scott Voss moment. I'm praying that today, that in a moment that God's going to begin to speak to you and He's going to bring out the calling that He has for your life. Because here's what I know is that God is a God who calls us. I believe that God is still calling people. He's been doing it since the very beginning. You study through the Bible and you see this theme over and over and over that God calls ordinary people to do the work that He has for us to do on this planet. When I think about it all the way back, you think about Abraham and how God called Abraham to leave his home and leave his country and go to the place that God would call him to. How He called Moses to be the leader of his people out of Egypt. How He called Elisha to burn the plows and begin to follow Elijah to become a prophet. You go into the New Testament, you hear about how Jesus called the disciples to drop their nets and come follow Him and become fishers of men, or how He encountered Saul on that road to Damascus and called him to rearrange his whole life to begin to follow what Jesus had called for him to do. And that same God that called those people is the same God that is calling you, and He's calling me. And in a moment, you can have that moment of calling. I remember my moment. I've said it so many times. Just a few weeks ago, I shared it with you. It was in a moment in a Sunday night service in a little bitty church in Alva, Oklahoma. I remember sitting on that second row with hands raised in the air, tears coming down, streaming down my face as God began to speak to me and say, I'm not just calling your parents. I'm calling you. I have a plan and a purpose and a calling for you and for your life. And here's what I know, that in a moment, God can begin to speak to some of you today. He has a purpose. He has a calling. He has a plan for you. It's not easy. My calling over this last 30-something years has not been easy, and some of you are here today and you are wrestling. That's the story of this movie. As silly as it is, it's a story of wrestling with your call, and some of you are wrestling with it. And I want you to know today that the calling is not just for the pastor. It's not just for the people that work at the church. It's not just for the missionary, although God might call some of you to do that as well, to go into full-time vocational ministry. But even if you're not a pastor, God has a calling for your life. So everybody say, God has a calling for me. God has a calling for your life, and that's what I want to talk about for just a minute today. In fact, let me just show you three things from this movie about God's calling. The first thing I want you to see is that God's calling will challenge you. Come on, God's calling, it's gonna challenge everything that you have inside of you. In fact, you see in the movie, here's this ordinary school teacher, and yet he steps up and he says, man, I want to do something for these kids and for my friend, and I want to make a difference. But then he begins to face the challenge. How am I going to do it? I don't know how we're going to raise $48,000 until one day he's sitting with his friends watching an MMA fight on the screen, and he finds out how much those MMA fighters get paid even if they lose, and he thinks, well, maybe that's how we're going to be able to do it. And maybe some of you can kind of relate to that a little bit. Maybe not the MMA fighting part of it, but maybe you can relate to the part that says, I know God has a calling for me, but I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know if I'm enough. I don't know if I have what it takes. I don't know if I have the gifts or the skills or the ability to really fulfill what God has called me to do. When I think about that, I think about Moses in the book of Exodus chapter 3. Moses has a calling moment. Here he is just out in the middle of the field tending to his father-in-law's sheep, and one day he comes upon a burning bush, and in that moment God begins to speak to him, and he says, Moses, take off your shoes, for you're standing on holy ground. And he begins to call him to be the leader of God's people, to get them out of slavery in Egypt. But I want you to see how Moses responds. In verse number 10, he says, God says, so now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go? Maybe some of you, that's how you feel. Who am I that God could call me? Moses says, I'm not a leader. I don't speak well. I don't have what it takes. And he begins to make excuses. And sometimes that's the tendency when we find ourselves in that calling moment. We begin to make excuses. But when God calls us, we can't make excuses. We got to begin to make a way. We got to begin to say yes to God, to everything that He has called us to do. And this is exactly what happens with Scott in the movie. He steps up and says, I'm going to do my part. No more excuses. I'm going to make a way. I'm ready to fight. Watch this. Hey, come on, that's good right there. I don't even care. It makes me laugh if it wasn't so real, right? Isn't that what life is like? Isn't that what the calling is like? You're like, oh yeah, I'm going to follow God's calling. And then guess what happens, man? It exposes every weakness. It shows you all the areas of your insecurity. It brings out all the areas where you're least prepared. Sometimes it knees you right in the face. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to do what God has called me to do. And yet you face these obstacles. In fact, it's like somebody said, every new level, you face new devils, right? And every time you step out into what God has called you to do, you can just understand that there's going to be challenges. There's going to be obstacles. In fact, we've said it many, many, many times throughout the years here at LifeGate. Sometimes you face obstacles not because you're doing something wrong, but sometimes because you're doing something right. You see, when you're following Jesus, when you're really surrendered to his call, guess what? When the obstacles and the challenges and the difficulties come into your life, it's not necessarily because you're doing something wrong. No, because you're following Jesus. You're trying to do what he's called you to do. It's because you have an enemy, the enemy of your soul who wants to knee you in the face. He wants to steal, and he wants to kill, and he wants to destroy. He wants to keep you from fulfilling the calling that God has placed upon your life. God wants to take us from glory to glory to glory. But you know what that word glory means in the Hebrew? It means weight. And how many know that the calling has a weight to it? When you begin to follow after what God calls you to do, there's a heaviness, there's a pressure, there's pain, there's problems, there's struggles, there's difficulties that you have to face. Your calling will challenge you, and yet that's not a bad thing. That can be a good thing because it's those challenges that build us and prepare us and make us able to fulfill the calling that God has called us to. In fact, this is what James was talking about in James chapter 1 and verse 2. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kind." Whenever you get need in the face, consider it pure joy. Why? Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. James says, hey, in your calling, there's going to be challenges. You're going to face trials and difficulties of many kind, but even in that, God is working in you. In fact, let me say it like this. If your calling isn't stretching you, it probably isn't shaping you. Your calling will challenge you. And that leads me to our second thought, and that is this, that not only will your calling challenge you, your calling will cost you. If you're going to say yes to what God has called you to do, guess what? There's going to be a cost that is involved. And this is exactly what happens for Scott Voss. He has to face, am I willing to pay the price? Am I willing to consider the cost of the training and the pain and all it will take to do what I feel in my heart to do? Watch this. You feel that, don't you? You feel that because that's what life is like. That's what following Jesus sometimes is like. It's what doing what God calls you to do sometimes is like. There's a cost to it. What does that cost? Pain. The cost is the loss of your comfort. It costs you your image sometimes. Sometimes it costs some friendships and some relationships that you have to let go as you begin to follow. There's always a cost to the calling. In fact, this is what Jesus said. Look at this. He says in Luke chapter 9 and verse 23, he says, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily." The calling always has a cross to it. You see that moment in the life of Jesus when he knows the cross is coming. And he goes into the garden to pray, and he goes a little further than where the disciples are. Disciples fall asleep in that moment, but Jesus, he wrestles with that calling. You might remember the story how he prays and he says, "God, if there's any way, take this cup from me. I don't know if I can bear this cross. I don't know if I can pay the cost of the thing that you have called me to do." And he begins to pray. He begins to agonize. The Bible says he agonizes so much that his sweat becomes like great drops of blood. I mean, the agony is there. And in that moment, as he wrestles, he comes to that place of surrender. And he says these powerful words. He says, "I don't want to go, God, but nevertheless, not what I want, God, what you want. Not my will, but let your will be done in me." I'm willing to pay the price. I'm willing to pay the cost, and that's what it's like for every single one of us. That's what the calling moment is about. That's what that calling moment was for me. It's the reason that sitting on that second row, that tears were streaming down my face, because I saw and I knew, I'd seen my parents serving in ministry. I knew the cost, and I was wrestling with what I surrender to that cost. Was I willing to be able to bear that cross, to take it up daily and do what God had called me to do? And this is the struggle that Scott had to go through. He had to sacrifice some time. He had to risk some embarrassment. He became the joke of the school. He had to endure the pain. He had to go through the times when he got beat up and he had to bleed, but he just kept moving forward because he knew there was something that he was supposed to do. There was a purpose that he was supposed to live for, and he knew that the calling mattered. He knew that it counted for something. And as he did, guess what happened? It began to do something in him. It began to change him. In fact, that's our third thought today. Your calling will challenge you. Your calling will cost you. But notice this third thing, and this is so powerful. Your calling will change you. When you begin to follow the calling of God in your life, guess what? It'll begin to change you from the inside out. In fact, here's what I know about calling is that your calling is more about who you are becoming than what you are actually doing. And oftentimes what we like to do is we go, well, God, what do you want me to do? Like, what career do you want me to take? What ministry assignment do you want me to do? What's the thing that you are calling me to do? And all those things are important, but those are really just assignments. Those are not your calling. Come on, right? Your calling is not about the thing that you do. Your calling is about who you are becoming. In fact, look what the Bible says in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse number 9. Look what Paul says. He says, he saved us and called us to what? To a holy life. Not because of anything that we have done, but because of his own purpose and grace. What does the Bible say that God has called us to? He has called us to what? It says right there, a holy life. Notice this. It doesn't say he called you to be a pastor. It doesn't say he called you to be a teacher. He called you to be a welder. He called you to be a real estate agent. He called you to be an MMA fighter. It doesn't say that. What does it say? It says he called you to a holy life. It's not about what you do. It's about the who you are becoming. And oftentimes we get really caught up in the what, but we don't understand that the calling is really more about the who. It's about who we are becoming. It's not about a career. It's about our character. It's not about a position. It's about our personhood. And yet here's what's amazing. When we say yes to the calling, even though the calling is not about what we do, guess what? God uses what we do to begin to shape who we are. When you surrender to the calling, what's so cool is that God uses your doing to shape your being. He uses what you do to change you on the inside. See, what I do is a pastor, but what I'm called to is a holy life. And yet here's what's cool is that as I pastor, God uses that to make me more living a holy life, right? Because there's times when I don't know how to do it. And so what do I have to do? I have to depend on God. There are times when I'm out of strength. And so what do I have to do? I have to go to God. There are areas that I need to grow in. And it's the fact that I got to get up here and teach y'all that I have to learn how to do it in my own life. You understand what I'm saying? And it's the same thing for every single one of you. When you say yes to the calling of God, guess what happens? He uses the things that you are doing to change others' lives. But even more than that, he uses it to change your life. That's why the greatest discipleship tool I have as a pastor is to get you being people saying yes to your calling. Because I know if you'll say yes to your calling, guess what he'll do? Yes, he'll use you to make a difference in this church and in this community and in your family, but he'll use what you are doing to make a difference inside of you. Your calling, it will challenge you and it will cost you. But it's so amazing that in the end, it will change you. And this is exactly what we see happening for Scott in the movie. Scott, as we get to the end, the conclusion of the movie, he finally gets to the big MMA fight, the one that's going to pay out all the money. But what's amazing is that when he finally gets there, he really doesn't need the money because they've already raised most of the money. When he finally gets to that point, like he doesn't have to prove anything because everyone sees what he has done. And in that moment, he doesn't even have to go through to the end of the fight, but he goes through to the end of the fight because something has changed in him. He's no longer that burned out old high school teacher. He's no longer just going through the motions. Something has stirred in him and it has changed who he has become. Watch this. Oh, doesn't that just pump you up? Come on. I love these kind of movies, right? Because you feel the humanity of it. You feel the struggle of it. You know what I'm talking about because you've been there before. You're trying to do something that's in your heart. And you know it's a challenge. I want you to understand, God has called you. He hasn't just called me as the pastor. He's called you. He has a calling for your life. It may or may not be to be a pastor, but he has a calling for you to live out. You were created in Christ Jesus to do good works which he has prepared in advance for you to do. And some of you just going through the motions. You're bored with life and you can't figure out why. It's because you're not living out your calling. Oh yeah, it'll challenge you. And it'll cost you. And some of you, that's the reason. It's the reason you're holding back. You're wrestling with that because you know if you say yes, it's going to cost. You know if you say yes, there's going to be challenges. Guess what? There's going to be challenges either way. Might as well have challenges that actually have a purpose. Some of you are wrestling with that today, and can I encourage you today? Stop wrestling. Surrender. Tap out. Say, God, I'm surrendered to you. I'm surrendered to your calling. When you do, hey, there's going to be a cost. There's going to be challenges. But it's worth it. Why? Because God will use you to bring change in others. And he will use what you're doing for him to bring change in you. And all you got to do is say yes. Just say yes.
Thank you for joining us online today. Make sure and hit subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for more notifications. We can't wait to engage with you this week.